Welcome to Rethinking Communication. I'm your host, Michael Ashford. Come with me on a journey as I explore how we better connect with each other through the power of our words. For most of us, formal education left gaps in our ability to communicate well with each other, especially when trying to navigate conflict, inspire change, and overcome misunderstandings. I'm a former journalist, a speaking coach, and a communication expert, and my goal is to encourage you to rethink what it means to be an effective communicator, from the stage to the meeting room to the living room and everywhere in between. Why do people change? And for that matter, can people change? I've covered the topic of change a lot on this show and have asked those questions before. Why do people change? And can they change at all? And I've shared and I've written about the fact that I do believe that people can change. I actually think that most of us appreciate change. We know it to be a fact of life that change happens, that it is inevitable, as one might say. There are a lot of cliches out there about how humans don't like change or resist change, but they never give the context of why that is. And I have talked about it on other podcasts, but I'm not sure that I've specifically referenced it here on this show myself. So I want to bring to you my favorite quote about change that I use all the time. And it is from author and leadership coach John C. Maxwell. And John laid it out like this. People change in 4 different seasons. When they hurt enough, they have to. When they see enough, they're inspired to. When they learn enough, they want to. When they receive enough, they are able to. Those are the 4 times that people change. Now, whenever I share that quote with others, I always make the point that one of those 4 seasons is not like the other. It's when they hurt enough that they have to, that doesn't fit with the others. Where they see enough that they're inspired, where they learn enough that they want to, when they receive enough that they're able to, it's the only one that focuses on the negative. And when you hear the phrase, people resist change or people don't like to change, the context that is needed is often, it's because they don't want to be hurt to change. Yes, there are times in life where we have to change. We have to because we hurt enough. We have been forced to change through other reasons outside of our control, perhaps. We're fired from a job. We lose a loved one. We get terrible medical advice that forces a change upon us. There's a car accident that happens. There's a whole host of things that are out of your control that perhaps happen in your life that as a result, you have to change. It often is unexpected. It often is something that takes us by surprise. And that means we often don't like it. I'm sure there are other ways that we are forced to change that we do like, but I'm trying to think of some and they don't really come to mind. I mean, there are people out there who don't like surprise birthday parties, so I can't imagine that forced change or hurting enough to change will make too many people feel great. And there are certainly many times where we hurt enough to change that we can turn around and actually derive benefit from it. For instance, when I lost my job, and let's be honest, when I got fired from my job now over 8 years ago, that was a sticking point in my life. That was a turning point in my life where I had to say, either I'm making some changes here or this becomes something that is repeated in my life, and I don't want that. So yeah, going through the loss of a job was certainly not something that I would have chosen to do in that moment, but I believe I came out better because of it, and I used that as a tipping point in my life, in my professional career, to become better because of it. So not all change that hurts us to change, not all change that forces us to change is necessarily bad change. We just don't like it. We would much prefer to be inspired, to learn so that we are taught something new, perhaps, and that we receive, that we're able to, that we feel like shackles have been taken off and that we can advance down a path, a positive path. I've shared a lot about change, and I talk a lot about change because it is at the core of what we try to do when we are communicating with others. Most of the time, when we are communicating with others, and I don't even know that I should say most of the time, many times when we are communicating with others, we are trying to bring about or precipitate some sort of change in them. It can be in your role as a salesperson. You're trying to get someone to change from doing something one way to doing something another way and using your product or service to accomplish that task. That is a change for them. If you are trying to motivate an employee at work from bad behavior to better behavior, from not meeting expectations to now meeting and exceeding expectations, you as a manager and a leader are trying to affect change in their life. If you're a coach, same thing applies. If you're a parent, same thing applies. If you're a teacher, same thing applies. We spend a lot of our communicative effort trying to elicit change out of others. And what I so often see in the ways that we were taught how to communicate change to others falls into this trap of believing that the change has to be all or nothing. That the change that we're advocating for from somebody else has to be either you go from what you are doing right now and completely shift over to what I want you to do, and there's no in between. There's no gray, messy middle. It is one or the other. It is the false duality of choice that we present people with that is often how we approach wanting someone to change. Now, of course, I'm sure your mind goes to the current season that we're in here in the United States, which is our political season, our election season. We're less than 2 months away at this point from electing a president. If you take a step back and you look at the arguments being made on television, on social media, on the radio perhaps, or on podcasts, so much of the approach to getting others to change is what Dan Vallone called here on this show in episode 87, a total victory fallacy approach to change. I am going to totally change your mind. I'm going to totally wipe away the old and replace it with the new as I see it, the new as I define it. My truth versus your truth, perhaps. My views, my perspectives versus your views, your perspectives. That is so often the way that we try to approach the reasons and getting people to change through total victory. Either I assume total victory, or if I don't see that that's possible, if I'm not certain, if I'm not 100% right, I'm going to remove myself, isolate, push you away, create an enemy of you, stereotype you, label you as the other. And I spoke about it in my second TEDx talk. It's the difference between peacekeeping and peacemaking. Peacekeeping says, you know what? This is making me uncomfortable. I don't like this. And I can't fully change you to bend to my every aspect of my will, that I'm going to remove myself from you. I'm going to isolate. I'm going to keep the peace around me in this little protective bubble, this cocoon. So I'm going to cancel you. I'm going to force toxic positivity when I'm really upset. I'm just going to claim that everything is good and happy. I'm going to sink further into my media bubbles, whether it's on social media or whether it's on cable television. I'm going to hear the things that I want to hear, the things that align with my version of reality, and everything else that I can't get to convert to my view of the world, to my perspective, I push away. That's how I keep the peace around me. And a peacemaker does something very, very different. A peacemaker says, you know what? Something is better than nothing. And I don't like this gap that exists between us. And so what I want to do is I want to stand in that messy middle. I don't believe that there is this false duality of choice, where it's either your way or my way, and we have no other options in between here. A peacemaker says, I'm going to lean into the uncomfortable conversations, knowing that even a little bit of change is better than nothing. And oh, yeah, I might need to change too. In fact, I'm open to the possibility. Not saying that it will happen, but I'm open to the possibility that there are things that I might not know. There are perspectives that I do not understand, perhaps fully, perhaps at all. But I'm going to sink into that messy middle and get my hands dirty with the work of making peace, of trying to understand what other options are out there besides the two ends of the spectrum, and decide that there is perhaps a third, a fourth, a fifth way that we can bring about some sort of change, some sort of understanding. This is where, in that quote from John C. Maxwell, this is where change occurs when we see enough that we're inspired to, when we learn enough that we want to, when we receive enough that we're able to. Those things, inspiration, teaching, giving, those things exist in that messy middle where we set aside the total victory fallacy and we say, I'm here because I believe that there are other choices than what are first presented when we talk about a false duality of choice. And when you get to that moment when you decide that you want to make peace instead of just keep peace, when you decide that you know you don't want to be forced to change any more than anyone else, but you want to affect some sort of change, that something is better than nothing, when you finally acquiesce to, look, it may not be 100% my way, the way that I would want it in a perfect vacuum, but I'm okay if we move a little bit closer together in understanding and in perhaps compromising, in co-creating a new idea to a solution or to the problem at hand. I'm okay with that because something's better than nothing. Then there are two questions that the best peacemakers, that the best communicators ask themselves to get themselves into that mindset, to get themselves not comfortable with the messy middle, because that's a really awkward, uncomfortable place to be at times, but give themselves the courage, the bravery to step into the messy middle and stick it out. To say, there's something here. I believe in this. I believe in change. I believe that change can be for the better, can be for good. And I don't want to try to create change in a vacuum, in a total victory fallacy way of looking at the world. So the two questions that people ask, the greatest communicators ask, when faced with, I want to change something or someone, the first question is, what's my goal? And the second question is, what could I be missing? If you can focus on those two questions whenever you go into a conversation, whenever you go into a scenario where you seek to create change from someone else, your efforts will be rewarded exponentially more if you first ask those questions of yourself and you remain committed to their answers. Because when you talk about, look, what's my goal here? I want this person to understand where I'm coming from. I want them to understand on this issue how I feel about it and what's been true for me, that I now believe this to be the path for me, what I believe is right for our country, what I believe is right for our family, what I believe is right for our company, what I believe is right for our relationship or our friendship. These two questions fit anywhere there is conflict, anywhere there is that messy gray middle, and you feel the pull to the extremes when you want to change someone. If you focus on, what is my goal here? Is my goal to be, let's say you're having a dispute or a political argument with a friend. Is your goal to win and defeat your friend to where they slink away with their tail between their legs and acquiesce to your every position on the argument at hand? Or is your goal actually to keep the friendship? Is your goal actually to remain in relationship with that person? And that is the most important thing over winning over winning a political argument and the points that might you might tally up in your brain when that happens. What's my goal? I want to stay in relationship with this person, but I'm concerned that they don't have the full story as I have experienced it or seen it. And so my goal is I want them to understand me a little bit better, but also I want to understand them a little bit better because I care about them as a person. I care about them as a human being. I care about their needs, their wants, their desires. And I get it. It's easier to do it if it's with a friend. It's perhaps easier to do it with a family member, although sometimes not. It's a lot harder to do this and keep this "what's my goal" question in mind when it's a complete stranger, when it's someone on the internet. And you have to consider the vehicle, consider the channel that you're going through. Maybe your goal is not possible in a Twitter thread or a Twitter back and forth. But if it's somebody that you can reach out to and say, "Hey, I can tell you care a lot about this. I care a lot about this too. And I think we're coming at this from really different points of view. You want to jump on a call and talk about it? You want to jump on a FaceTime and talk about it? You want to jump on a Zoom and talk about it? I want to understand you a little bit better. I want to get where you're coming from." Remain focused on that, on answering that question. What's my goal? And keeping it top of mind, and your outcomes will improve. It likely will not result in a total victory for you and your views and your perspective. But if we can move a little bit closer to that gray, messy middle where we begin to, hey, your experience says this and my experience says this. Well, what if they came together and actually we solved this problem like this? Or what if we thought about it like this? Or what if we did this? New solutions to big problems get created in that space. What's my goal? And then what could I be missing? People ask me all the time, how do I become a more curious person? Like, I don't feel curious. And I often talk about the fact that we were taught to be certain over curiosity. And curiosity is a buzzword these days. I see it on LinkedIn all the time. Be a more curious person. Well, the way to be a more curious person is to ask more questions. And it doesn't have to be much more difficult than that. A curious person asks questions about things that they don't know about, and they admit that there are things that they don't know. That's crucial. A curious person understands there are gaps in their knowledge and wisdom and understanding that, quite honestly, could never be complete. The cliche, walk a mile in somebody's shoes, it's nice. It's a great thought. The way to understand and walk a mile in somebody's shoes is to ask them questions about their experience, not try to live out that experience on your own. It can happen, but the whole point of that saying is get to know them, get to understand them, get to understand their perspectives and experiences. And if you ask yourself the question, what could I be missing? That should help you begin to think of questions that could make you a more curious person. Curiosity doesn't have to just be book smarts. Well, I wonder how the stars are made. Being a more curious person can literally be that person seems like they disagree, seems like they have a different life experience than me. I wonder what it's been like for them. Let me go ask them. That's how you become a more curious person. And you don't need to be trained as a journalist like I am. You don't need to have a master's degree in communications like I do. I promise you do not need those things. You just need to ask yourself these two questions, and you will become a more curious person. What is my goal? What could I be missing? When you align yourself with the answers to those, you will become a more curious person. That is conversationally how we can begin to bring about this notion of change in others, where we begin to remove ourselves from hurting people enough that they have to change and the total victory fallacy of conversation. And we move into that space where we begin to inspire change, where we begin to teach someone else enough that they learn that there may be some other ways that they might begin to change in their lives. When you're able to gift someone the wisdom of your experience, that they are able to receive that in a way that doesn't make them feel like they are being forced, that's when real change happens. And again, it might feel, and often feels, morally uncomfortable to do this, especially when you believe you morally disagree with someone on a very important issue. I get it, it's out there. But the messy gray middle and the work of making peace requires that you have the end goal in mind. And I will say this, when we talk about hurting people enough that they have to, that brings with it the requirement that you have the authority and control to do so. And we often don't. We often don't have the authority and control to force someone to change as much as we might want. We often don't have the authority and control to create a situation where somebody does hurt enough that they have to. Even doctors who give medical advice or medical diagnoses to people to change their diet, or they're due to die 10 years earlier than they would with a normal life expectancy. Even that, people struggle to follow the doctor's advice. They have all the authority in the world from a knowledge standpoint to tell you this is how your body's going to respond to your current lifestyle. And we still push back on that. We still don't change our diet. We still don't change our exercise habits. So just think about the things that are of a moral issue to someone or to you and how difficult that must be. And you don't have the authority and control. All you have is influence to inspire, to teach, and to give. This is why I love that quote from John Maxwell so much. It lines out exactly how a curious person would approach change. Change not only in themselves, but change that they want to bring about in the world and that they want to see from others. This works at work. This works in your relationships. This works in your friendships. This works with strangers on the internet. This works with strangers that you meet in person. This works. I promise you, it does. The final step in being a more curious person is you've got to give yourself the space to be able to ask those questions. This is, again, not something that we are often taught how to do. Our society is very much of the immediate response, the off-the-cuff reaction to what is said, to what you hear, to the information that you're receiving. Respond as quickly as possible. What's on your mind today? Twitter or Facebook asks. Just sitting there waiting for you to come up with something as soon as you see that post or that message that rubs you the wrong way. And again, the more curious people give themselves the space to ask these two questions. What is my goal? What could I be missing? If you can pause, if you can give yourself the space to ask those questions and remove yourself from feeling the pressure to give the immediate response, then you will have time to ask and answer those questions for yourself. And I'll close with this other quote that I absolutely love. It's attributed to Viktor Frankl. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. Giving yourself the space to ask those two questions gives you the freedom to show up more as yourself, gives you the space to show up in a way that actually produces the results that you want, rather than the knee-jerk reaction that we often feel so compelled to give. You want to get better at communication. You want to get better at eliciting change from others. You want to get better at understanding perspectives so that you have a more full understanding of the issue at hand, so that your response can be more considered and appropriate. You become a more curious person when you realize that that space between stimulus and response is where your curiosity is formed, where it grows from. The seed is planted there, and you have the freedom to choose it. You have the freedom to delay your response, to ask yourself, what is my goal and what could I be missing, and then respond out of those answers rather than what you often feel compelled to do these days. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Rethinking Communication. You can always reach out to me and give me your thoughts on this episode by emailing me at michael@rethinkingcommunication.com, or you can find me on LinkedIn and reach out there. Let's connect and let's have a conversation. You can also go to my website, michaelashford.com, and reach out to me there. You can also find information on my speaking and coaching, all that good stuff. Please do me a favor and share this episode with someone in your network who might find some value in what I had to say today in this episode. You would do me a huge favor if you shared it with just one other person in your network who might find this information helpful. I'll catch you on the next episode of Rethinking Communication, and until then, keep asking questions.